Letter 36 of Young Americans Abroad, or Vacation in Europe, Travels in England, France, Holland, Belgium, Prussia, and Switzerland, edited by J. O. Choules, read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Letter 36 Hague. Dear Charlie, I assure you we felt sorry to leave Antwerp. It is such a thoroughly fine old place, has so much of old Spanish history still bound up with its present aspect, and is so decidedly foreign in its appearance, language, etc. I have only time to say a word about the docks of Antwerp, which were a favourite project of Napoleon Bonaparte. They were constructed at enormous outlay, and the Emperor expected to make this place the great rival of London. At the peace of 1814 the dockyards were demolished, but the great basins still exist, and are used for purposes of commerce. They are useful in winter to preserve vessels from the ice which floats on the Scheldt. It was a lovely morning when, having parted with our English friends, who proceeded to Bruges, we entered on board an iron steamer for a passage of about 8 hours to Rotterdam. The boat was neat and clean, though small, and the cabin was adorned with baskets and pots of flowers of various kinds. The view of the city and its fortifications was fine as the boat receded from the shore. On our way we passed Dort, one of the finest towns of Holland, and from appearances, I think, one of much trade. Its population is 20,000. Here, in 1618, was held the famous Synod of Dort, the great labour of which was to settle the claims of the rival systems of Calvin and Arminius. At this synod Bishop Hall was a delegate from the English Church, and he, good man, never dreamed of denying the validity of the ordination of his brethren in that council. We felt interested, as we sailed along this town, in remembering that here, in 1421, 72 villages and more than 100,000 persons were drowned by the incursion of water from the dike. The river stretches far away, and looks much like a lake. If anyone looks at the face of the country, he will at once understand why these regions have been termed the Low Countries. We passed, as you may see on the map, Gravendeel, Willemstad, and the far-famed fortress of Bergen op Zoom, which is one of the strongest places in Holland. You know that Antwerp stood a long siege in 1831, when it suffered severely, and as we passed Fort St. Laurent, we were pointed out the spot where a most gallant occurrence happened at that time. A gunboat belonging to Holland got on shore, and the Belgians hastened to capture her, when her captain, a young man named Van Speyk, rushed into the magazine, put his cigar upon an open keg of powder, and in the explosion perished, with 28 of his crew out of 31. He was an orphan who had been educated at Amsterdam. He has a fine monument next to Admiral de Ruyter's, and a fine ship of the Dutch Navy bears his name. On board our boat we found 2 young gentlemen, of about 15 or 16, belonging to Rotterdam, who were going home for vacation. They are pupils at a boarding school in Brussels. They spoke English very well, and gave us a great deal of pleasing information. The dinner on the boat was very excellent. On reaching Rotterdam, we merely rode through it to take the cars for the Hague. It is a fine-looking town, has 75,000 inhabitants, and some noble East Indiamen were lying at the wharves. Many of the houses were like those at Antwerp, and told a Spanish origin. Here I noticed looking-glasses at the windows, so that anyone in the parlour can see the reflection up and down the streets. I was glad to be able to see the bronze statue of Erasmus, who was born here in 1467. We were delayed by the absence of the authorities to sign our passports, but were in time to reach the cars, and then started for the Hague, which is 13 miles from Rotterdam, and we were 40 minutes on the way. The road is excellent. We passed through Delft, and here could not fail to admire the gardens and country houses. It was dark as we entered the town, and we took up our quarters at the Dolen, which is a name indicating that archers have resorted thither. Whoever goes to this house will be sure to do well. We obtained capital rooms. Early next morning we called on Mr. George Folsom, our chargé d'affaires. This gentleman is an old friend of mine, and he gave us a most cordial welcome, taking entire possession of our party for the day. Mr. Folsom resides in a very handsome style upon the Voorhout, the best street of the city, and which, like every other part of the place, is adorned with noble trees. It seems strange to call this place a city, it is so thoroughly rural in its appearance. It hardly shows like a town of 65,000 people, on account of being concealed in shrubbery, cut up by canals, and overshadowed with forest trees. Very early in the day we were kindly provided with carriages, and taken to Scheveningen, a village about 3 miles off. Our road lay through a fine avenue of trees. This is a great fishing place, and a great watering place. It has a large hotel, which we went to for lunch. It is the great rendezvous of the fashionable part of society in Germany during the heat of summer. We could not help drawing a contrast between Scheveningen and Newport, and not much to the advantage of the Dutch beach. This spot has some celebrity, as the port whence Charles II embarked for England at his restoration. On our way back we saw the residence of the Queen Dowager, sister to the Emperor of Russia, and of whom Mr. Folsom speaks highly, as a very excellent and sensible lady. Mrs. Folsom and the ladies of our party had visited the Queen the day before. The house looked quite snug, and very unpretending. On returning, we at once repaired to the museum, which is supposed to be in many respects the finest in Europe. Here, too, is the famous picture gallery, in which are the best productions of the Flemish and Dutch schools. You are aware that Holland has had extensive trade with China and Japan through her colonies, hence the richness of this museum, which, so far as Japan is concerned, is unrivalled. I have a catalogue of this wonderful collection, and to that I must refer you, for as to description of what I saw, it would be impossible to tell you 100th part. The Oriental curiosities are very rich and fine. A plan of Jeddo, the capital of Japan, is very curious, made by natives. The historical treasures are rich and numerous. Here we saw the armour of De Ruyter and that of Van Tromp, well scored with bullets, the sword of Van Speyk, a part of Czar Caesar's bed, the dress of William of Orange when he was murdered at Delft, the pistols and bullets by which he fell, etc. We all expected much pleasure from the gallery of paintings, and I believe we experienced no disappointment, and how could we, with such treasures of art and genius? Here we noticed with most interest Rembrandt's surgeon and pupils dissecting a dead body. This is number 127. The body is admirable, and the legs are thrown into shadow. The portraits are lifelike. The portraits of Rembrandt's wives are fine specimens of colouring. Number 123 is the world-renowned Bull, by Paul Potter. The glory of this work is its minute adherence to nature. The leaves and plants, and every appearance of vegetation, impresses the spectator with the idea of reality. This was carried off to the Louvre, although the Dutch offered £20,000 sterling to redeem it. I liked the pictures of De Ruyter and Van Tromp, but the treat of all to me was the show of small Dutch pictures, by Gerard Dow, 35 in number, a battlefield and hay cart, by Wouvermans, and many others from his studio, Flight into Egypt, by Van der Werf, Fruits and Flowers, by Bruegels, Interiors of Cottages, by A. V. Ostade, a Kitchen, by Teniers, and a very large hunting piece by Snyders, whom I greatly admire. As to portraits, they are in any number, and some are very fine. One of Lawrence Koster, by Dürer, is curious. We went to see the King's Palace, and here we found only the relics of the splendid gallery which was once to be seen. An auction had recently disposed of more than half the paintings. The late monarch was a man of taste, but had sadly involved himself in its gratification. Many of the paintings here are exceedingly fine, and will be disposed of in a public sale next October. After leaving this place, we went with Mr. Folsom to see the Brimenhof. This is the place where the Dutch Parliament meets. We went into the second chamber and heard the debates, which were not very edifying. The appearance of the members was very much like that of a New England assembly of legislators. The fine Gothic hall here is said to be the oldest building in the city. It was on a scaffolding in front of it that Barnevelt, the Grand Pensionary of Holland, was beheaded in 1618 at the age of 72. We also saw the gateway of the tower in which Cornelius de Witt was confined in 1672 on the ridiculous charge of conspiracy against the Prince of Orange. The populace feared his acquittal, and they by a manoeuvre introduced his brother, John de Witt, the Grand Pensionary, to visit him in prison. Then they broke in, dragged them forth, and tore them to pieces under the gateway. We went to look at de Witt's residence, which is plain and unpretending. I do wish you could have been with us in our ride through the Bosch, a fine park of forest trees near to the town. The forest never looked more pleasant to me than here. May is a sweet month, and especially when, with all her verdant beauty, she is just about to rush into the arms of June. We all talked of you in the charming drive, and Mr. Folsom made kind inquiries after you. On reaching home, we went with our kind guide to see the house which was occupied by John Adams when he was at this court negotiating a treaty with Holland in aid of our independence. We are to spend tomorrow and the next day at Haarlem, on our way to Amsterdam, and the boys will tell you what we see there. Affectionately yours, J.O.C. End of Letter 36. Read by Sibella Denton. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, please visit LibriVox.org.